Like you said, I'm Paul Van Dyke. I have the honor of being the moderator for these great panelists today. And part of what we're running through is some high-level cloud things, and I'll moderate questions, but I'm also interested in questions from the audience that I can interject. So get them into the chat, look at me across the room, and let me call on you if you want to get things in there. So I want to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. So, Adam.
Great. So I'm Adam Weedy with Core BTS, representing probably the GCP space today. I had the pleasure to work with Juan for the last few years in GCP, getting back into Azure and Synapse and some of that capacity. But yeah, I'm excited to share some of my experiences.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Munoz. I work for a company called Breakthrough out of Green Bay. We are a transportation logistics company. We are 3 years into our cloud transformation journey, and just in the last month, we shut down our data center. So it's taken a while to kind of walk that journey, and we have a really heavy focus currently on our data stack and getting that automated as well. Kind of work across the entire data stack, so analytics, data science, data engineering, kind of bringing all those things together. So that's kind of my focus as of late.
My name is Scott Hippis. I'm a principal architect at Core BTS. I've had the honor of working with both these folks, or a number of them, over the last 18 years or so that I've been here, and really help architect solutions for clients, do data analytics, and got to work a little bit in the Google Cloud Platform, mostly work in Azure, but also done some Snowflake.
Greg Desatel, I work with Bandata Group. I've been with them for a couple of years. Prior to that, I was kind of in many of the roles I heard today, from a director of IT, manager of BI for companies such as Kohler Corporation, Milwaukee Tool. So if there's 3 letters for an ERP system, I've probably touched it at some time. But for the last 20 plus years, it's been all around data, moving it, collecting it, and working to make your guys' job easier. So I look at the world different because I've been in your chair, and anything I can do to help would be tremendous.
Thanks so much, guys. Our first section on this is kind of a overall cloud data considerations, but not too deep. So questions here are meant to get us warmed up and going. Think about how you'd answer it in a minute, not too long. So I will start with Scott. Why cloud?
I could pick one or rattle off a whole bunch, but cost efficiency. So although we'll talk a little bit more about how you have to be careful of, you could spend more, but it's also easy to spend less and be very cost effective. And there's nowhere else that you could prototype a solution for like pennies or less than $1. And that's great to be able to literally in minutes spin up a solution, prototype it, and hardly have spent anything. And then when you're done, either shut it all down or pause it. So that's great.
Nice. Greg, why cloud?
You hit on a couple of the key points. I'll just throw a few more in there. Simplicity. So again, when you move into the cloud, all of your hardware that you're currently maintaining, upgrading, licensing, basically all that disappears. So from just a pure simplicity perspective, tons of value. And then again, is most cloud offerings are pay as you go. Some aren't, but the majority are getting there, which basically transforms the cash flow, meaning you own it. So instead of, coughing up $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 day one, you basically pay as you go. So you can control your cash flow a lot better. And as you mentioned, Scott, you can monitor that. And that alone is part of that education process to how do I manage it to be successful.
Thanks, Greg. Juan.
The Breakthrough, one of the kind of the main reason for us to go to cloud was just the opportunities it brought to us. So one of the things is just being able to store all of our data versus partial of it. So we've been able to come up with some new insights, and once we're not throwing away some of the data, we've found some interesting things that have been happening that we have gone unnoticed for years. Some lost revenue as an example, and also the ability to kind of quickly do metrics and data science tasks on the entire data set versus 1 week worth of data and having to go faster. So it's super exciting to kind of see that stuff happening.
Nice, thanks. Adam.
So I think scalability is a huge aspect. You can start, if you're a new company, you're starting small, you build a small solution and your solution can scale very easily in the cloud. And then I'll echo as Scott said too, the ability to do POC and learning, having a subscription in Azure, being able to spin things up and try Synapse and Databricks and other solutions like that, quickly and easily. So I enjoy that aspect.
Nice. So the next question is about talking to our leaders. I've experienced the same problems that others probably have in terms of talking to our leadership above and running companies. Why cloud, or what is cloud, or what kinds of things? How do I talk to my leaders about cloud, Adam?
So I remember a story about security. One of our sales guys talked about this when trying to convince, companies that cloud is secure, and he mentioned he'd take them to the data centers, like Microsoft's data center down in the Chicago area, and just to see the security that they have in place was very impressive, and to be able to do that same level of security on-prem on your own, I think that's a key piece to see the importance that obviously huge cloud companies put into security.
Opportunity to show, not tell.
Yep.
Right. Greg, how do I talk to my leader about cloud?
You got to focus on, leaders usually have short-term memories. They also are very impatient. You get 20 minutes or less, you get 6 bullet points. So you have to focus on how cloud aligns them to the roles of their organization. What's their goal? I'm going after X. As Wayne mentioned, I want to do some data scientists. I want to be a data person. Well, cloud will help you get there by being able to do things you couldn't do. So you have to find those nuggets in that burning platform and focus on that. Most leaders came out of sales and marketing. They didn't come out of IT. So don't spend too much time going into the weeds on the cloud and everything, because you're going to lose them. So you need to be able to talk in that marketing and sales. So again, not only do you need to be transparent and set expectations, I would recommend actually bouncing it off of their peers, going to the executive leadership team. And if you can get some relationships, talk to the VP of sales, talk to the marketing person, get their buy-in before you go to the true president, because they can help you, because they're in those meetings every day. So really align yourself with those leaders to get them to be your champions at that table for the journey.
Sorry. Wow. Talking to your leaders?
Yeah, so, 3 years ago, as I mentioned, we started this journey at Breakthrough to kind of go to the cloud. We made a couple of different arguments. One was the cost consideration, by kind of not having all of our data center costs were quite expensive to have all that capacity, peak capacity kind of scaled up all the time was quite costly. 2 was the innovation cycle. So how quickly can we bring products and experiment and bring things new out? And we were able to deliver 2 new products while we were kind of doing our cloud migration. So that it is quite powerful what you can do there with all the managed services. You don't have to hire infrastructure people as many infrastructure people to keep up with data centers and so forth. So we mostly made those 2 arguments of cost and ability to do things quicker.
Nice. Scott?
I think most of it was covered, so I totally agree. It's about enabling opportunities, so kind of whether that's innovation or the ability to scale or whatever. And I'd probably categorize the cost as minimizing risk. So, you want the opportunities, you want to minimize risk, so you can minimize your costs, you can minimize your investment to do any kind of early prototyping. It lets you be more agile, which means less upfront investment to be able to test those ideas.
Yep. Nice. Thanks, Scott. The next one is kind of about, as all of us are kind of relatively local, Wisconsin-ish, and come to the meetup, and we want to meet others in this space, all data professionals. What would you say about the health of the local user community of data professionals, those that are out there working in this space? Scott?
I think it's good. Just the fact that we have this group, and it's also interesting how diverse it is. And what I find most interesting is that Wisconsin is kind of an anomaly as far as what is actually the market share of cloud. So notice nobody mentioned AWS. Several people mentioned Google, which would be the smallest. And so we're almost like flipped. So it's both neat that you can find lots of other stories, but even some of those niche, like it's spread out across Wisconsin. So I think we have a nice diverse set of cloud platforms, and that allows us to kind of share more stories and insights across that.
Nice. Adam, how you found the local community of data people?
So that's an interesting question with GCP and some of the solutions that we've built. There's also more of a global community. So with Slack channels and one of the tools that we've used was DBT to build out our solution in
DBT.
Yep, it's a transformation tool,
Okay.
Open source, and there's a Slack community out there, so we're able to, not only work locally in groups like this, but more globally as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the change in the kind of the world today is neat to see.
Yeah, or more local means much wider.
Yep.
Juan?
So, I think that in the overall, the data community is really great here. There's a lot of people who have experience around the stack. It's very healthy, data science, data engineering, analytics, visualizations, that's all good. But we are in the GCP stack, and we only restricted ourselves to people with experience in that stack. It'd be Slim Pickens here. The one thing doesn't matter too much. All the skills are kind of transferable, as these two guys can attest to. So, yeah.
Nice. Greg, you're farther away, but still local Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I really like is the thirst. There is such a thirst for learning, and this meeting, the 6 years of this meeting is a perfect example of it. So you have a lot of people, and they're all interested. I think one of the things that they look for is a yellow brick road, and there isn't one, unfortunately. And so as they're learning all the pieces, I think it's going to be really interesting to see the path that they lay for themselves in their organization. And what I like to refer to as their legacy. And the one thing that we kind of coach people with is to find those biases that we all have. So what's interesting to me is in the world of data and analytics, Azure, AWS, Google, you pick one, and people are passionate about that to a level I've never seen before historically. They are so like, if you're an AWS shop and I come in with Azure and setups, you go to war. It has nothing to do with functionality. So,
Well, Windows, Mac, come on.
I know, but the best thing about it is the passion, and that passion I think is going to drive organizations to get in that journey. And that to me is exciting to watch. And I love to challenge them. And I think it's good because it opens up, they get to see the world with their passion. And then when someone challenges them, they get to learn to make sure they make the best legacy for their organization. So I would say passionate, which is awesome.
I like that. Nice. All right, so this one's more about the idea of data being product oriented and having data as a product oriented strategy. So how would you move to a data as a product oriented strategy? Greg.
I mean, again, it's key for every organization. So from a product perspective, I mean, the value, it can't be under stress. But I think what a lot of people miss is a revenue stream. With moving to the cloud, your ability to take your data and turn it into a revenue stream is massive. You mentioned, I think earlier, like some food chains and the point of sale tapes. To be able to connect supplier and consumer in the cloud, almost near real time, is a capability that didn't exist other than people's like wild, crazy thoughts 5 years ago. But you can we've literally brought people together in less than an hour. So we got a third-party data using tools like Snowflake and others, and gave them point of sale data, and in 1 hour they were doing visualizations between the two, and they were just blown away. So turning it into a commodity to me is it's sitting there, and it's going to be a revenue stream for organizations. They just have to go ahead.
How do you turn a product as a data oriented? Data product oriented strategy.
So you really need to focus on the consumer of that data. So if we think about what data as a product is, it's the data is the product that you're serving. So it's really understanding what the consumer of that product needs and really focusing on that and, focusing on uptime and reliability and data quality, all of those aspects. When you really think about it as you're serving your consumer, you want to make your consumer happy. So I guess, consumer focused on that.
Juan.
It's kind of interesting hearing these responses. I think I misunderstood what data product oriented strategy meant. So I'll give my two definitions. I think that there's two perspectives I see from that. One is kind of taking your data and producing an asset right out of the exhaust of it. So that's kind of what Breakthrough does. We have core data that we get from our clients, and we repackage it and sell it back to them for additional revenue. So that's kind of a strategy we put them together, but that has really nothing to do with the cloud. One of the other piece of it is the technical piece, right? So when it kind of goes to the data mesh that we'll talk about later, but it's organizing your data and producing internal products that you can use to leverage and build things on top of. And the cloud does give you the ability to kind of store data, all your data, organize it, have various ways of processing it, whether it be in a warehouse or in data lake strategy. It kind of has all that available to it and very easily integrated them together. So, thinking about it, understanding them, and finding what works for your use cases is kind of the key.
Nice. Scott?
I was wondering if someone's gonna bust out the data mesh,
I'll do it.
so. Admittedly, as much as I think data as a product is maybe being coined as part of that type of mentality, frankly, I haven't, used it or really seen it as much. So I think more of it, from my perspective, it really is, just thinking of it as a product where you have consumers and that, IT used to be this cost structure and instead see it as you are adding value. So you're really making sure you're delivering it on time, making sure it's clean, driving the right business decisions. So that's how I view it. But yes, if you were to Google it, I think you'd find some data mesh and other funky things that are probably beyond the scope of this.
Very nice. So what opportunities exist when we're no longer provisioning, configuring, upgrading the on-premise type things? I used to be a DBA. What's the role of a DBA or administrator in a cloud world? Is it lessened? What's your take on that? Juan?
I'm actually curious to hear about this from the other panelists, because we've had these discussions internally. We lost our DBA during the cloud transition, and we've been backfilling it with contract work. But to be honest, a lot of that work has gone away. The application developers take care of the application databases, and then our data warehouse BigQuery kind of doesn't need it. So it's kind of amazing how that thing works. So I don't know what else to say other than that.
Adam, what do you want to tell them?
I think it depends on what you're using within the cloud, whether it's the VM in the cloud and you're managing the servers and managing, that database and server as if it were on-prem, but it's just in the cloud versus, I agree with BigQuery, you don't have to think about scaling. You don't have to think about, you can really focus on the data and the queries that you need to write, and there isn't the need to have a DBA help performance tune. So I think it depends on where you're progressing and whether you're IaaS, infrastructure as a service or platform as a service.
Sure. Scott?
Hopefully it enables opportunities to save money, reduce risk, and all the things that ideally a DBA would have done if they didn't have to spend so much time provisioning, installing software, plugging in hardware. So now they can monitor it. They can make sure the performance is where it needs to be. They can get automated dashboards to, report on that, which also means opportunities. If you scaled it too high, you can easily turn it down and say, hey, now we're saving 15% because I noticed we need less of this due to whatever. And those can be more regular decisions, not upfront, but like monthly, weekly, daily. You can also automate scripts to auto scale up and auto scale down. If you know every day between 8 and 10, you need twice the server, scale it up, but now scale it down. Again, you can save 25% or whatever, on your costs. You can start thinking about the things you probably always should have, but maybe didn't. Should you have geo redundancy? Should a copy back of the data be in a different geo region so that if the Chicago data center, for whatever reason, some disaster happens, you have a copy of the data on the West Coast. And so all those opportunities, I think, were probably part of the role of DBA. You just got caught up in the tediousness of all the other stuff. Now you can do all those amazing things, saving money, reducing risk, all the stuff that you would like to do.
Greg?
Yeah, I agree with everything that they've said. Is the simple answer is, that role is going to go down. That's part of why you would go into cloud. However, what it does is it opens up other roles for that. So to me, when you're thinking about going to the cloud, if you're not bringing HR on your journey, you're going to get hit because that's one of your roadblocks. The fear for DBAs are, what am I going to do? I spent 40 hours a week doing all this stuff, and now you're going to take it away from me? They're going to kick, scream, drag. You need HR in there with you to talk about their career path. What are they going to do? Then for them, one of the things that you talked about is reallocating the DBA is, We just got done talking about different data, third-party data that the cloud enables. Take these DBAs who understand data better than most and have them go out and get that third-party data that they never had time to do. So we need to reposition them and retranslate them and not get them like, oh my God, if you go to the cloud, I'm out of a job. It's like, no, if you go to the cloud, you're gonna get all kinds of new capabilities and we're gonna put you on a path of things we never even thought we could do. So it's all about coaching and mentoring that DBA, because if you got a bad apple, it's gonna take your journey a lot longer.
Go, very good. All right, so that was just warm up overall, trying to keep it in a minute. The next section we'll go into is about the data architecture concept, specifically what's trending about these. So we might be getting into some terminology, and part of discussing it will be different people's perspective on what does it mean, data mesh maybe. So feel free to look at your other panelists, make a note, and we'll challenge each other with these questions. So it's not about a time limit or anything. So what about data lake, Adam?
So, data lake to me is a place to place your structured, unstructured data in a file system-like format. But also providing the capabilities to easily read and query that data as if it were in a database.
Sure. Sure. Scott?
Yes, I think data lake makes it easy for you to ingest your data, land it, so it doesn't matter if it's JSON or CSV or binary files or whatever else, you can land it there. But I think, to me, a lot of people's misconception is that means then that's where the process ends. And if you're just putting all those files there, that's what some people might call a data swamp or something like that. So to me, when I think data lake, I think data lake house or something like that, meaning there should still be a framework where you're curating the data and having different layers. So yes, you might land raw files, but there should still be some other more highly curated processing of the data to make it valuable to the business. Without making it more valuable, the raw data, you're back to pre-data warehouse analytics and all of that. It's just files. So the goal is to turn data into information, into insights, and really make it where you can start making business decisions. To me, the big value of data lake is, you used to use a SQL, or many people still do use a SQL database. The storage and the compute were highly coupled, and I'm sure we'll hear a few times, part of where the trend is moving is being able to separate that. Storage is inexpensive, it's easy to work with, so you're getting the benefit of that, and now you can kind of bring your own compute. That might be in the form of Databricks, it might be other systems that you move it into and process on, but you can put lots and lots of data there really inexpensively and still have that curation and other higher level stuff put on top of it.
Nice. Data lake one. What does it relate to a mesh?
To a mesh? I don't want to mix this together.
All right, there.
So for me, the data lake, comes from the Hadoop world, right? When you have files and you have Hadoop or Spark kind of processing them, that true separation. But for me, it's just that architectural separation of raw data and moving it across different layers of curation, as Scott mentioned, in addition to separating it out. So like my VP likes to call what we're building a data lake, but it is 100% a BigQuery. We're doing a lot of our transformation, not 100%, but a good chunk of it is inside of it. But we do store all of our raw data, and we have transformations that we need to pull another piece of raw data out, pull it back out. It's all just kind of there.
So is the compute still in the lake in that case? Or is it separated, storage versus?
It's still separated, right? Because BigQuery does separate its storage from its computed. The storage is billed at a different rate than the computation, so.
Okay. Data lake?
I think Scott, I could have looked in the mirror and said the same thing.
All right.
The biggest concern with the data lake is it turns into a data swamp, but a data lake typically can be your data scientists love fest. Because they always want to get to the raw data. So even though it's raw, that's where they want to go and play. If you isolate it right, but to your point, if the journey stops there, it's just going to be controlled chaos. So you have to transform it and somehow, and I use the word certified, like a bronze, silver, gold, whatever you want to call it. But people in today's world, and this is where IT in the business, you really need to work with that because data lake is thrown around everywhere. And everyone you talk to has a different meaning of it. So in your organization, when you start using that terminology, make sure you get some definition behind it, so then your whole organization is speaking the same. Because as you go from the IT group and then the vice president of sales, it's like, oh yeah, we got a data lake. They ain't gonna know what they're talking about. So make sure they know what they're talking about.
How do you keep it from becoming a data swamp, Adam?
It's really preventing or putting the right security in place so that you don't have everybody going into the raw layer and adding their own content and doing their own ETL and putting their own copies of the data. And so it's really having those separate zones and having the appropriate people in each of those zones doing the work that they need to do. Yeah.
Nice.
Paul, I would like to add that one of our upcoming events is going to be specifically about data architecture in the cloud space. So we're going to take this and go deep on it, so.
Nice. So staying high level, not too high.
Yeah.
Okay. I need a volunteer for what is data mesh? Go on.
Do I know what it is? I don't know. So the way, so I have come from a software development background as well. And so data mesh to me is the equivalent of microservices, I'm sorry, that kind of movement. Trying to decouple your monolithic structure into composable pieces of functionality that you bring together. And so the data mesh for me at its heart, forget about all the technology, is about separating your data as product and then having a team or a person responsible for it and then putting endpoints that people can integrate off. So to me, that's what data mesh is. It's putting the technology aside. Can you break down your monolithic data thing into discrete pieces, have points where we know we're going to integrate together, and then build new things on top of it, and keep building that mesh.
All
And
right.
Yeah, I think another way of saying it, that the mesh part is the decentralization. So rather than this IT team building a data lake, data warehouse, everything centralized, it's decentralizing it where now different either departments or domains, they have their main system. They kind of curate the data themselves. And so the mindset would be that they understand the data the best, they serve the data, they can, so you would kind of divvy up what was your traditional centralized data warehouse team, and now you'd be embedded, so almost like shadow IT, you start to go into the business.
The way I also look at it is that we're a centralized place, where data team is very centralized. I think we're going to adopt some of those mesh concepts though to kind of break up. We have a lot of data sources that we need to put some order into that chaos, because if we pull everything together just kind of randomly, it's gonna be spaghetti. So we are trying to adopt some of those in a centralized manner to some of those concepts. I think it's kind of interesting.
And it also is that the ability to, that API layer where you can,
Yes.
you can contribute to that and also pull the data out. Again, data as a product, give me this data set in this format, is that request for data.
And with the technology like with Snowflake and others, you don't replicate your data. So when you're building all these data meshes, one of the things that is fearful for what traditional is like, I gotta make continuous copies of my data. You can start building a data mesh and it's one set of the data. And you can build different like little substructures off of that without having to have another copy and another copy of the same data, which adds all kinds of headaches. So those are some things about like in the cloud journey, again, are gonna allow you to transform your organization to be able to move into this world, but you're gonna jettison all that baggage of doubling data, out of sync data, all that, you just jettison off the backside.
Sure.
How do you still do conformed type of data? If there's like our conformed dimensions in the past, how do you do that across the mesh, or do you not have them anymore?
So that might be a separate
Separate?
node within the mesh. The data, MDM solution may be
At the top.
at the top, and that other APIs or other, what are the nodes within the mesh? What do we call those? Those things consume the data, the MDM solution, so that is one of the products within the mesh, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you put the MDM master data management at the top, you said?
Whether it's at the top or it's
And it's
integrated, because MDM, that solution may require data from other domains in order to incorporate that into, to deduct, duplicate, and conform and all of those pieces.
And so the Kimball model could still be inside a data mesh. Is the Kimball model still live or is it dead?
I think there's always a role for the Kimball model and, when we talk about some more complex modeling techniques like data vault, that is a very complex design that you need to be very seasoned in working with data to be able to consume out of that. There's still a need data vault.
Yeah.
So within a Kimball model, that simplifies the solution, makes it align with the business and business users and makes it more understandable.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think Kimball is really designed to be easy for end user analytics. And regardless of what you do to help manage your data, all the complexities you might have of your data, in the end, there's still value in having a model that's easy for end user analytics. I think you might debate whether that's one enterprise Kimball model or multiple smaller data mart type models, but that notion of dimensions and facts, I think, is still valuable. And so, yeah, like with Data Vault, we're still layering a Kimball model, say, on top of that for the end users. Maybe a data scientist could go straight into the more complexity, but most users don't want that complexity. They want a simplified model.
Nice. So volunteer to tell us a little bit more high level, because we can't get too deep. Data Vault.
Yes.
So, because I was a practitioner of Kimball and AM, for a long time. So inevitably, your goal was to make it easy for end users. So if you have, so some of the challenges are multiple source systems, or you acquire companies, so you add more source systems, you remove source systems, and you need to do conforming. So you have customers here, customers there. These two customers from these different systems are the same logical customer. So as part of our ETL process, your transformation would have lookups and different rules, either cross-references or other things you could use to conform the data. But in that end model, what you want to say is there's really only one customer. So even though there were multiple underlying records, at the end of the day, you're choosing the winner and saying this is kind of the certified end result, one view, one truth of a customer. But in a more, I guess maybe sophisticated is wrong. But the reality is that there are often many questions you want to ask of the data. You might have one data scientist that says, I just want to understand the data from system A. And so I want to know what the customer looked like there. Well, in the Kimball world, we threw it out because we conformed it with B and we said, this is now like the one answer. Well, someone might say, I want to know what it looked like in that system and separately in that system. And now someone else wants to see them both. So Data Vault is all about preserving the underlying source data as is in a way that's agile and can evolve. If you have an existing Kimball model and suddenly now the schema changes or you need to add it, you're like, oh, how do I refactor this so it still works? How do I conform this additional source system so it still works? And that's always tricky. Data Vault handles all that by saying, yeah, we just kind of capture all of it at face value. And now the tricky part's putting the Kimball view on top, which is really saying, well, which view do you want? I can give you this, that, or that. And that's why it's still complex, but it simplifies it then for the end user. So I think together they work well.
Nice, thanks.
And so the key components of a data vault is your hubs, your links, and your satellites. So hubs is your business entities, the keys of your business entities. The satellites are the attributes of the business entities, and your links are the relationships, and you can have attributes of your relationships too. So those are really the core components of a data vault solution. And then the other thing I'd add is you really are maintaining all the history of all the transactional changes within the solution. It's really insert only at its core. So you're not updating records in place. Every change is captured in, so your satellites have all of that historical data in it. And we can get deeper into that, and I know we want to keep it at a high level, but those are the,
But yeah, so it should lend itself well for big data.
Yep.
Just insert it.
Nice. And any questions from the audience around, trending data architecture, the concepts, mesh, lake, something that you've heard that you wanted to understand a little more from these panelists? We'll put it in the chat. All right. It's not intensive. Go ahead.
So we're not a large company, small IT group, right? How does, and I'm, without getting too far into the weeds, how are you suggesting or guiding smaller companies who don't have good quality data and who don't have resources committed to cleaning that data to avoid having a data swamp? How do I get my data up to the cloud when, as it is today, I can't get the company to spend any time managing or cleansing to get quality data? Why would they do anything different in the cloud?
Are you still bleeding? Meaning you got bad quality data. Historically, you're like that.
Oh, yeah.
You've identified it as an issue.
Yeah.
Are there things being put into place now to prevent future bad quality data? Or is it like, yeah, it's all screwed up and it'll be screwed up tomorrow and we're not gonna hold any like Nick accountable for cleaning it up?
New data, we make an honest effort to manage and control the quality of.
Cause,
But existing data, no, we're bleeding on the existing data.
cause you asked the question and I'll just answer on my side. You guys can jump in. You said, how do I take what I have and get it to the cloud? That's simple. That's done. It's in the cloud. Now you got crappy data.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
said-
can get in the
You
cloud.
said, how do we do it without making a data swamp?
Yeah.
In your case, do you consider what you have right now a swamp? And if the answer is no, when you put it up there, it's not a swamp there either.
It's a swamp.
It's the
It's a
same,
swamp.
it's a swamp.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna be able to get out of a swamp until your organization, which takes us back to that first part about talking to your executives, understanding the value, that some effort, to some level, needs to be put on one of two things, cleaning it up going in, or stopping the bleeding before you go. If you don't do anything and you just move it up into the cloud, yippee-ki-yay, okay, I got rid of my data source, my DBA is gone, but I still got garbage, and I still can't make informed decisions. And if you wanna pay us to do it, I'll take your money.
I'd like to add, when we were planning the session, Scott mentioned something about, when you go to the cloud, not just lifting and shifting, but taking a look at things. Can we expand on that, Scott?
Well, yeah, that if you lift and shift, that is probably one of the few scenarios where I would say the cloud is actually more expensive. It's meant to be easy, but you're paying for that convenience. So there's in cloud, infrastructure as code, platform, or infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. So infrastructure means you're just buying a server essentially in the cloud. Microsoft hosts it instead of you. You still install operating system, whatever. Platform as a service is kind of in the middle. Software as a service, you just log in, you don't do anything else, you just get to use it. So anyway, as you move down there, there's opportunities to be really cost efficient. So you can, have that service where you're paying a penny every time you call the function, but if you never call it, you literally pay nothing. Where the server upfront infrastructure, you buy the server, you pay for the server, even if you do nothing, you're paying for it. So the goal is to shift towards platform as a service, not infrastructure as a service. That's where you can be cost efficient, you can scale up and down easily, you only pay for what you use. You want to get as close as consumption-based pricing as you can, not capacity, which means pay for it whether you use it or not. But what I was going to say as far as the data swamp thing, I agree. If you already have it on-prem, moving it to the cloud doesn't change that. As far as why would you spend time curating it, the funny thing is that even people who think they don't have bad data, one of the first outcomes generally of curating data and building a data warehouse is as soon as you can easily slice and dice, you're going to find all the anomalies. So you're going to be like, how come whatever, these 4 records don't fit the pattern? So that's one thing. And then the other, which was I really struggled with, but being a practitioner for whatever, 20 plus years, it used to be data warehouse was penny perfect. Every key ties, tick and tie, and that's your job. I kind of evolved because it is really about driving business decisions. So at some point, sometimes fixing that penny issue cost you $5,000, $10,000 more, or whatever, right? Was it worth it? Was it a big deal? Did it really change any business decision you would have made? So as much as it pains me, I don't like it. I'm not going to say I like it, it really is about making good business decisions. So I would try to quantify, if you are making bad business decisions and you can quantify it and say, we made a whatever, a $20,000 bad decision, then bad management if they don't decide to fix it. And if you can't say that there's really any financial impact, then as hard as it is, it might be, who cares? So either it's significant or it's not. And as much as that pains me to say it, I try to go there and I say, try to prove whether it's significant to the business.
First row I add to every table is unknown. I want inner joins.
Nice. Any other thoughts on trending data architecture concepts? Data mart? Data mart? What'd you have to say about a data mart, Juan?
So I should probably confess something at this point. I've been in data for a very long time, but my background is in more data science-y, high performance computing, that type of work. So these analytics concepts that were a little bit new to me, and Adam, Scott both taught me some things. So I'm gonna pass on this question because it's not really my focus. I'm really on the, I don't have to explain what they can do.
You're just smart.
I can give you my layman's thing of it. It's just, star schema that you put up for a specific purpose, specific modeling technique. Again, tailored to end users. That's kind of the distinction. Like my history is my users are data scientists. They're not business users. So some of these techniques are new to me.
Yeah. So I kind of agree with Scott too. Like historically, I've been an enterprise data warehouse. You build an enterprise model, everything works together, it's perfect. That's just not reality. Where data marts allow you to, you still share a lot, you may share a lot of the same dimensions, but you may build more focus-driven marts that serve specific purposes. That tends to be a lot easier to do than to spend years trying to build an enterprise data warehouse when your business is changing over those years. It's still, again, I would prefer a picture perfect, everything works, everything fits together solution, but that's just, in this day and age, things move too fast to be able to do that. So data marts give us that, we still strive for a Kimball style model within a mart, but it's more maybe a single star versus the ability for multi stars and everything relates together.
And I don't know if it's worth a step back because terms are often misused and mean different things to different people. So when we say enterprise data model, generally what we mean is we're taking all the various systems in the organization and we're trying to represent that as all of the facts and all of the dimensions kind of all related to each other, where you can do what we would call cross-domain analysis. So I want to figure out for this marketing campaign what I got ultimately over here in sales and what that cost me in manufacturing to give me my margin. You're trying to tie it all together. And sometimes that's not possible, right? Like you have to make certain assumptions. Not every system has a key that you can use to get into the other one. And so it's not always possible. So data mart is kind of saying these are the actual analytical needs we have. So we grab what we can and we give them a model that they can do what they need. We give them maybe a domain specific model to do what they need. And maybe we still have one that spans everything, but the one that spans everything is summarized because it can only go just so deep. So it doesn't need every detail of everything we ever manufactured, but maybe at a monthly grain, it lets me look at monthly marketing to manufacturing to sales or something like that.
And to kind of serve some of those needs, that cross-domain analysis, that may be more of a data scientist role to start using machine learning and artificial intelligence to do some of that determining of how that campaign actually contributed to the sales. So not that hard structure that has all those perfect relationships that tell you 100% this campaign resulted in these sales.
I don't know, I wouldn't think of it either, just start removing all the constraints on our jobs, of it doesn't have to be perfect, and just.
But the thing you gotta think about in the cloud with data marts is, A, they serve a purpose. And as we've talked about, is you've got two audiences, your scientists and your technical people who can rip through data. You've got your end users. Your end users are not gonna wanna go through a list of 250 fields to find the 4 they want to put on a Power BI. But the way that you get around that in the cloud is you create a supply chain data mart or of that. But with the cloud technology, like using that, the data's not getting replicated. And so you can put out, and again, I'll just use the word of view, i.e. a data mart for sales and marketing. The data scientist, the DBA is managing the whole enterprise architect. Oh, you need a view, here's the 22 fields. The minute I update this, that's updated. The maintenance just, and I don't have the data copy 3 places. I don't have a part number in 5 different places. I'm managing it behind the green curtain in one place, but you think I've got this nice little data set for you. And it's perfect, and if you want to add a field, I go in and I just click, 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 boom, and I'm done in 5 seconds. I don't have to reload, I don't have to go back and create another data set. My time to service you as a client, it's just minutes as opposed to, okay, put in a request, get the field, restore the data, all that disappears. So I think that they still have a purpose, but I think as you guys were talking about, and Wayne, as you were touching, it's the audience that's gonna dictate how many, and it's going to be the audience that's going to dictate how wide you're going to make it. And I think if you kind of break it down, and with the technology to blend 2 together, like I even look at finance and sales. They both want invoice information, but these guys get cost, these guys don't. Well, I can put in a whole ton of security and column level security and spend days getting that fine tuned. I can make a data mart with cost and a data mart without cost. That'll take me a couple hours. You be the judge of what you want to administer. I'd be like, okay, here's 2 views. You got cost, you don't. I think you were saying about the security. I'll set security up. Done. Doing that in the cloud versus on-prem and the SQL servers and all that. I think all of us would agree that in the cloud, we can get most of that done in a day or less. If you did it in SQL Server, had to build it all from scratch, have fun.
Kind of curious to hear everybody's opinion on the utility of these type of structures, data marts, schema structures, when you have tools like Looker, we're using Looker, where you can kind of define these things in their own language on top of the SQL. So how does that kind of work together?
So, so there's still that role of that semantic model.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yep.
I'm waiting for you to say.
Okay, so there's still the role for that, the ability to create calculations on your data, so your year-over-year analysis, that semantic model where you can drag and drop and say, I want to look at sales by month for this customer sliced by this supplier, and to build those, so those semantic models sit on top of that dimensional model in your dimensional store.
So examples of that would be like your Power BI, or you mentioned Looker, Cube.js type. So, there's various tools, but, and I was gonna say, so one of the terms we didn't really, we're kind of dancing around, but is the notion of a lake house. So when we're saying you don't have to have a copy of the data, so if you have your data warehouse essentially, or even a data lake, you can have these views where your Kimball model is just a view into that. So you don't need to duplicate the data. However, there are cases where maybe that does make sense. So in the case of Power BI, potentially you do want to import the data into its own Power BI model so that you can do things like define additional business measures and calculations. So I think there are semantic models that you might use to serve your data mart essentially that can then add that additional layer of value where those relationships are understood, the business measures are defined in a consistent way, and that can be part of your deliverable as well.
There's a slippery slope with that, and that's the piece of your culture and your users. So the slippery slope with that is when you bring it into Power BI and you create a data set, that's only good for that group that knows that data set is there and accesses it. So if an organization, and the larger ones will have Power BI or Tableau or Click, or you pick one, a lot of companies have multiple. If you allow your developers to go into their solution of analytics choice and do all of that, it's that developer that everyone has to go to, and you are by default creating a bottleneck around it. The farther you can push it back to the source, the farther like a computation, the farther I can push it back to Snowflake. I'm using the power of a Snowflake or that compute power to generate that calculation for all users to see. And that's one of the things that we always talk about from a company's culture perspective. In some organizations, the Power BI developer is the person that has to sit in every single meeting because nobody knows what they've done behind the scenes for that. And that's a good thing for a lot of reasons because they can move faster. They don't have the IT protocol and the submit a ticket and da, 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 da. You want a formula? You can develop it right there. I got it. There you go. Vice President's happy. The life is a wonderful place. Problem is that developer just got promoted, left the company, and everyone's sitting around going, what the hell's that formula at? What did they do in that database and where is it? And so I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think it's this is one place to put it and there's an excellent value if that organization supports it. If that organization doesn't have all the developers and they're not communicating and documenting well, use the power of the cloud to put them there and let that process it. Because again, now you're talking response time, you're talking, I'm working on a visual and I hit it. It has to calculate it because it hasn't been calculated. It's sitting over here. There's a lot of, I don't think there's a black or white answer.
There,
I think it's, let's talk together and then we figure out which is the best one for our organization.
right, and it does depend on how things are implemented. So if you implement a Power BI or tabular solution and every single developer builds their own mini tabular solution and that ends up to be kind of a swamp as well, where you've got all these different copies where the calculations are different versus a shared tabular model, whether it's an analysis services or Power BI, but we can have Power BI consuming, many different Power BI dashboards and reports consuming the same Power BI tabular model. So it really depends on how you implement it.
Yep, totally. 100%.
And so the pushing back to the server, I fully agree, but there is a distinction between what you can do in a semantic model and what you can kind of push back to the server. So in a calculation in a database, you can only do essentially what would be like a column level calculation. So for each given row, you can have a calculation. You can choose to maybe pre-aggregate your data, so maybe you're summarizing it and for that particular view. But specifically, like say working with DAX within Power BI or something like that, that expression language is a unique calculation that no matter how you're slicing and dicing, it might be able to do both, like, your year-over-year calc with the filter applied. So some of that, unfortunately, you can't push down into the regular, I would say, SQL queries.
Totally.
But whenever possible, I agree, that's where you're gonna get the performance gain. So trying to augment your data with those attributes as much as you can makes sense, but some complexity, the nature of the multidimensional query or whatever, all those need it.
All right.
Did that answer your question, Juan?
I was going at the Kimball, we talked about the data mart and those are all methodologies to kind of get to a user's serviceable model that people can pull, but don't these tools somewhat diminish that? You put your model in Looker, you put in a tabular model. Does the underlying structure matter that much anymore?
So
Other than it has to be,
there needs to be that mechanism to go from the,
I'm not saying quite the raw data, I'm saying does it have to be Kindle, does it have to be, get the model, I mean, I would say no model, 100% blame model,
yeah, so at the end of the day, it's the person using the Looker
Yeah.
solution that needs to be an understood model, whether it's facts and dimensions, often a flat, single table with the facts and the dimension, all that in one single flat table, like Excel, the way Excel pivot tables work. Your data is in a flat table, that works.
that performs very well in these modern
And then when we start talking about BigQuery and how that data is structured, ultimately Kimball within BigQuery looks very different than Kimball within maybe a Snowflake or SQL scenario. So
I think it's a valid point, and I've thought about it too. So when we say, okay, we went from enterprise data model, now we go to like focused data marts. And if this is the set of data you need, why even have facts and dimensions at all? Why not fully 100% normalize it, one flat thing, so all of your kind of parent attributes are just repeated in each row, but a single row at the lowest grain, and that's where you go. And
You want to query by SQL, but these tools make it.
yeah, and frankly, I'm not opposed to it. So to me, it really comes down to the reusability of, it's almost like that data as a product again, right? So that's a very specialized product. It works for them. But now if you want more reuse out of it, that doesn't work well for others. So I think part of the goal of Kimball is try to maybe meet in the middle and say, these are dimensions represent key entities, things we want to slice by, and we think these are kind of universally useful in our organization, and these are kind of key facts. So you're trying to make it more universally useful and reusable, but I don't disagree at all where, like from a performance, the technology would probably be even more happier with just that 100% denormalized one file.
The biggest thing we run into is when you start analyzing metrics across domains, like you said. So like if you want to take your sales and your cost and start merging those together, and you want to preserve all your dimensions. I mean, the only way within Power BI we've really settled on being able to do that efficiently is with data marts. And that's how we build most of our end user analysis, is so that they can take certain facts and compare them across multiple dimensions.
You're right, that 100% denormalized works with one fact. The
Or-
moment you want.
Facts in the same grid and tied to the same entity.
yeah, you
True.
have to,
If you
The exact
can,
same shared
often-
dimensionality.
Often like we're construction, so our construction projects, they have the whole work breakdown structure, well, the cost. Well, when you bill a customer, it's not that same breakdown structure. So there's, like if a operations manager comes in, they want to see how their projects are performing across the whole operations group. They need to be able to say, for every project, give me the cost, that's all at this layer. Give me the revenue, that's all at this layer, and give me my profit. So that's where we kind of start running into that. But sometimes they want to look at it by project, sometimes they want to look at it by group, division, type of work. I mean, all the dimensions start to come into play, and that's where the data marts come in. But if we can, I mean, yeah, we like to have that single layer. I mean, that's definitely easier for the users to be able to just say, here's my sales table, and here's all my dimensions.
All right, so bringing it back to cloud. So we've heard at surface level, you've aligned a little bit on some of the common terminologies for mesh and data architectures. And we talked a bit about how it's a religious battle, right, Greg, about the right platform. So now, why Google BigQuery, Juan?
So one, I should say that I'm not one of those people who's tied to their platform. I think all these major platforms, they're all kind of the same.
No, that's why you're on the panel.
I mean, they're all gonna do this thing.
I
They're
was
all
gonna
gonna,
say the same thing, actually, so.
I'm not one of those people, but, you have to pick one. For us, I'll just tell our story. We have a lot of large retailers as our client list, and they would be kind of unhappy if we went with AWS. And there was an aversion, to the Microsoft stack because of the history of the client, the company's historically been an open source kind of shop. So Google was the answer for us. That's it. I mean, it is a nice data stack, fully integrated. It's 100% Google stuff across the data stacks, which is really nice.
What would you say its main differentiator is?
Was that?
Main differentiator, does it have one?
It's 100%, you have a viable data stack across the entire platform, everything from data ingestion, stream processing, data warehouse, data lake, data Spark. It's all kind of built in, it's all serverless.
So it's not as much a stack as it is
It's a
altogether.
platform, it's all together. I mean, we could put Snowflake in there and do that, but it's all there, it's just ready to go. So there's one contract,
Sure.
one set of technologies.
All right. Cloud platform, Greg, why, I'm going for Snowflake.
Snowflake?
I don't know, what do you got?
Yeah.
Why your cloud platform?
Well, Snowflake to me, I mean, with the market sharing, the adoption, and again, that could be a prime example of it. To take SQL Server developers or even Oracle developers and move them across, their ability to adopt and learn that language and learn how to do it. I mean, and Nick, you can help me out here. It didn't take you, when we walked in on day one, on day two, he was off writing his own SQL and snow code and everything. And then the ability for the transparency, who, what, where, when, who uses it, when they use it, what time do they use it? I can take you to a millisecond. So when you talk about cloud, and one of the things that we're working with clients on is the FinOps part of it, is your ability to take your Snowflake costs and break them down to whatever level you want in a short amount of time, and then, look at it, analyze it, plan. I mean, it's amazing. On top of all the stuff that you've mentioned in terms of being able to ingest it real time and all that stuff, all of them are kind of jumping over each other. But some of the differentiators that I like is the third market. Because again, when you can ingest the third party's data that's sitting out there in less than an hour with yours, I'm like, that's big for me.
Why Synapse, Scott?
So I don't know that I would say Synapse as a whole is a collection of things that include like Azure Data Factory and Spark but most people probably think of it as what used to be Azure Data Warehouse, this massively parallel processing. And frankly, I think that's kind of not used as common. So I'm kind of more with Juan of, I'm not as all about Azure necessarily. What I do see is a lot more convergence around the technology. So Snowflake underlying blob storage for the data, separate compute on top. Google, same thing. And really Azure, the main Synapse has dedicated pools, which is that it's like a SQL database, so it's its own compute and storage, slightly more coupled, I'll say, because technically they're coupled, but really using Azure Data Lake storage with Synapse serverless queries, that gives you that same kind of lakehouse effect where even though you're writing SQL-like queries here, even though you can view it in SQL Management Studio, technically the data still only lives within your Azure Data Lake. If you want, you can put a copy of it in whether Synapse or Azure Database, but you don't have to. So to me, in that regard, really all three of these can be a viable, say, data lake house implementation. And obviously, if you're on Microsoft platform and Azure, it integrates really well. So I think that's part of the reason for choosing. So like you said, like Juan said, often there's other drivers as far as preferences and this and that. I think it's a really strong platform, but that particular technology, Azure Blob Storage, it's pretty much, that's really one of the benefits of it. Move it to any cloud you want. If you don't like one of them, pick up your blob storage data, move it to a different one.
Adam, is there no difference to you? Come on.
There is a difference. So with
Adam loves us.
BigQuery, so I'll kind of focus it on BigQuery itself. And I know the other solutions can do this as well, but really the ability to ingest very complex JSON data into BigQuery, it's hierarchical, so that structure is in BigQuery and you can easily query it. So there's that nesting, the ability to have your data nested. So their BigQuery, Google's recommendation with the Kimball style model is to have your fact table, your dimensions nested within the fact table. So you're actually building a model within a table in BigQuery. So you've got your facts and you might have your product dimension, and every single fact has it's not a copy of the dimension, but that product is nested within that. So it's a little hard to explain.
I could kind of get it, but why is that better?
Speed. So
These are doing scans, right? They're doing scans.
yeah,
across
the
columns.
data, yep, the data is columnar. So really under the covers, if we really think about how the data is stored, you're not really storing a copy of that same record for every single fact.
Well, you aren't, just for preference.
It's, yeah, and again, I don't know under the covers exactly how it's stored. So it's columnar, it's compressed, it's, yeah. So I just found that to be an enjoyable, well, maybe that's my spin on it. It's an enjoyable language to work with, and it's fast.
Nice. So cloud platforms, we talked about how easy it is to scale. What would you say about the scalability of your platforms that you know most about? Is it all the same? They scale the same way, just add more to them, or?
They all can scale. I think again, is who's allowed to scale it? And when is that scaling? So can you scale on the fly or not scale on the fly? Or can you scale while a query is running, or do you have to wait till the query stopped? If I change my backend, do I have to wait 15 minutes for it to refresh, or is it immediate? Because I think all of them can scale. It's just a matter of those like administrative processes, and it's the biases that I think we would have. If one takes 15 minutes, it's like, well, it's always been that way. What's the big deal? It's 15 minutes. Well, someone else may say, well, I can do mine in 5. You know, mine's better than yours. Is it? Is it really better, or is it just the fact that, you know, you have a bias for 5 minutes and I have a bias for 15? And so to me, I look at them and go, they all can do it. The question becomes is which one fits your organization, your culture, and your team?
So maybe is that the new DBA, knowing how these platforms scale against what you need to give the business?
That's moving, and that goes back again, is it's not the DBAs. I mean, a developer, like when Nick is running a query in Snowflake and he needs a higher performance, he has security, he goes back to the security thing. He hits 2 clicks. He doesn't need to go check with anybody.
Right, but I'm saying the new DBA would be the person who has to answer for, well, I did this and suddenly $7,000 sprung up out of nowhere.
I think that there's more like the system administrators, and I had kind of a question when you actually started talking about the DBA stuff. So like, I mean, we have a couple of system administrators that have kind of taken over managing our Azure stack, part of the stack. I mean, I managed all the Snowflake stuff. No, that's so easy. I mean, super easy, as Greg was saying, but outside of just the data stack, I mean, we have a lot of challenges just with the administration of, you know, whether it's getting compute up to ingest data, it's the app service, APIs, however we're doing it. And I was just wondering, from like going out to different clients and seeing how like the ones that do admin the best as far as getting like your actual cloud up and running, like whole infrastructure piece of it. I mean, you can't just go and flip on the switch sometimes. I mean, Snowflake's a little different because you kind of can, it's hosted in their tenant, but like if Azure Data Factory, I mean, somebody's got to turn something on for you there. Synapse, somebody's got to turn something on for you there. I mean, how have the companies made the best transition to be able to, because I mean, the DBA is not necessarily gonna know that either. So those skills, I mean, we've been learning as we go, and it's been a struggle for sure.
So you're talking about when a resource is initially provisioned, meaning I don't have, say, an Azure Data Factory or Azure SQL database and I want a brand new one? Or are we talking about scaling up an existing one?
So like, part of what makes the cloud so great, like you said, is being able to do proof of concepts and spin things up and try stuff, whether it's Databricks, whatever. Unless the organization actually gives you access within your tenant to be able to spin all that up yourself. Like, I guess, is that what a lot of customers are doing?
So I'm, you know, we kind of lead Scott down this path, because I know, because I'm surprised that you didn't mention DevOps as one of the benefits of the cloud and the ability to codify that.
Yeah, so I mean, DevOps is a huge thing in the ability to what we call codified or infrastructure as code, which I accidentally said earlier, you know, so defining that in a template is code. So I want an Azure SQL database that's this scale or SKU level, and, you know, that becomes its own code. And so once you have those templates, it's easy to provision, and you simply take that same template essentially and say, okay, I want another one. And really that becomes more useful, not so much for your own prototyping, but for like dev, test, prod, QA. So you define it in dev. So part of your development is defining the resources you want and their scale. Now when it's time to go to test, you simply take that same template and say, deploy it there. Oh yeah, and I'll have another one. I'll have a UAT and a prod. And so it shouldn't take long to reproduce that. But it's a little bit different than having the freedom to prototype on your own. So kind of the Snowflake scenario, yes, you can stand up as many, let's say, databases as you want, but you can't stand up a whole nother tenant, right? That would require special permissions. And Azure's kind of the same way. So it depends on how your admins do it, but the goal is to organize solutions within a resource group. So that's kind of the logical container. So generally, I know for like our sandbox in our organization, I'll allow anyone to do it, but ultimately I create a resource group and I hand it to them and say, okay, now within this, your own sandbox, create whatever you want. But ultimately, we don't have it where everybody can create it because that's a little bit Wild West. But what I do recommend is like, you know, in the Azure world, the Microsoft world, there's MSDN license. So if you have an MSDN, you get Azure credits with that, free credits. And so all of our associates have that, and that's then your own essentially billing mechanism that you can stand up your own tenant if you want. So, you know, I have my own I created just for fun, and I can create as many resources in there as I want within my credits, my free credits. Beyond that, you got to put down a credit card, but most of us are content.
What I'm hearing, and Nick, and kind of that coming up, is the learning curve of the cloud platforms. Is there something, everybody probably already has data. Maybe it's not business intelligence, but they got some data. They think of cloud, they've got to modernize, they've got to bring it into the cloud. What would you have to say about the stories of your cloud platforms learning curves? For me, as we just kind of went with Azure, Microsoft Shop, it was, okay, from where we're standing, we've got SQL servers, we've got traditional databases. I need to start seeing what that looks like in a cloud, and then slowly trying some of these other new things. Maybe a lake. Okay, what does that look like? And I look at things like Google BigQuery, and I'm like, that's just like running off the deep end. There's nothing in comparison to what I'm used to. So, am I being fair to Google BigQuery or not? What's the learning curve story of these platforms?
I mean, in terms of the database, the BigQuery itself, I think these guys will answer. I don't think it's that steep. There's a few new concepts. The main thing is just, you know, I think we're gonna get into costs, you know, that is a true serverless thing. So you are billed per use. There's no, that's it. So, and SQL, I mean, that's nice part of this.
No?
Yeah, so from a learning curve perspective, like as you're learning the cloud, find something similar that you're used to. So BigQuery, there's a query console and you can write SQL and you can create tables and you can query tables. It's very easy to get started in that space. And similar with the other, and Snowflake, I'm sure is very similar where it's, you know, find something that you're used to and that's your baseline for learning and growing in that space. And that's my experience.
There are, you know, along the data side too, that there's, you know, general learnings of the organization. Like I remember having these discussions around having buckets, you know, those are publicly addressable and on the web. You know, trying to say, we can put a firewall in front of that, and like, that's just not the way it works, you know, these type of discussions that is more broad than just the data warehouse portion of it, but there's a lot of learnings there too, though.
Yeah, because I mean, that was a big thing we ran into is a lot of the stuff we were trying to stand up when we started going down that path. And we started off with an Azure SQL Server and Azure Data Factory. And we ran into all kinds of issues because our general security structure was everything needs to be on network.
Yep.
So
We had to change that.
yeah,
That was a fun.
so you guys did change, we haven't changed it yet. So every time we spin something up, it's like a new experience to try and figure out how do we get this thing behind into our VNet and configure it so that we can actually talk to those systems. So, I mean, we've had a struggle with that just from an administration standpoint. And yeah, I mean, we just recently started having conversations. Do we, you know, give us as a data team access within our resource group to actually start spinning some stuff up? Because, you know, we've started looking at, you know, logic apps and functions to help ingest data from APIs and stuff. Because Snowflake doesn't do the ingestion itself. And we have Matillion, that's part of it, but Matillion is sort of a hybrid infrastructure slash platform as a service model. There's a VM, you still gotta stand up and you gotta provision all that. That's gotta live within our network. So that's been the big learning curve, is how do we, spin this stuff up in the cloud, but yet still have our kind of existing traditional security models in place that don't work so well with the cloud.
The network and security component is significant here. From a financial services perspective, and I had a large banking background, and, we had the networking team, we had the systems team, we had the database team, and we could bring it online, right? And we had to secure it and secure it in-house, but this is a whole nother world, and that could be a whole nother topic that we talk about.
Oh, Nick's gonna be on a future panel.
Okay, you volunteered.
I think so. All right. Cost considerations, hidden management things about cloud. Can't go real deep today. We got 20 minutes ish left, so we can think about it. Who wants to talk a bit about the platform they know well and the hidden management points and maybe the cost? The experience with.
I mean, I can say along what you were saying, and it's not a sales pitch, but, so it's great to innovate and prototype in the cloud, but once you're ready to really roll out larger enterprise solutions, bring in an expert or become the expert, because things like security and some of those things that you don't need to get it to work, but you'll want to before you have that be a widely used production thing. And so the other lesson learned that inevitably, and which is why it's good to do it with, if you have free credits and whatever, I think every platform has some sort of free trial, start with that. Because inevitably you'll leave something running, you scale it up, forget to scale it down, and all of a sudden they're like, you spent it all, or you owe us $1,000 or something. Almost every platform, I didn't test it with Snowflake, but my client did. There's one forgiveness usually. It's an unwritten rule, but you can go there once and be like, oops, and they'll like write it off. But after that, you're on your own. So my advice is almost every platform has either a quota or a cap or something like that. So you can say, you know what, I only want to spend either whatever, $1 a day or $30 a month, whatever it is, put those caps or those budgets in place. And that way you have a safety net. If you hit it, it might, temporarily either scale back or something, they have different rules depending on the platform, but set the budget, don't leave it open-ended.
Nice. Kind of things are hidden management aspects you deal
So
with.
I'd agree with that too, with BigQuery, and you can put massive amounts of data in BigQuery, and it's $5 per day terabyte that you process. So yeah, the storage is separate, the storage is cheap, but when you're processing data, when you're querying data, it's $5 per terabyte. So if you put massive amounts of data in there and you write queries that process a lot of data, you have the potential to kind of run up the bill. But they do have some of those quotas that you can put in place and requirements for partition filtering and things like that to really help reduce those costs. But I agree, you want to make sure that you're putting those guidelines in place.
And monitor it.
And I forget the specifics, but I think we did some group buys. We're like, even though we're maybe hitting, there's 100 million records, we're gonna group buy it all, we just turn like 10. But technically, it's scanning the 100 million, so that's still a very expensive query. So yeah, you never know. You think you understand the billing and consumption and cost rules until you start using it.
Yeah, and that's what we talk to clients about, a FinOps program that monitors that. To your point, I could put it in place, but no one monitors it. It's just wasting time. And so by educating them on how to look at those things, and again, is using the tools connecting into these tools. So like, I don't care if it's Power BI tab, well, you pick it, you can tap into that raw data and manage it, and then you can set alerts through your visualization tool. So one of the things people don't like, they don't piece it together is like, oh, I gotta go into Snowflake and I gotta look at what our credits were for the last month. And they go to the Snowflake administrator. Well, hell, I could put a Power BI or Click or whatever you want out there. That's an automatic alert that it sends it to me, almost real time or every 4 hours. It'll be like, you got a spike, and I can look and go, oh, hey, I gotta talk to Scott. What's he doing? So you can use the cloud tools to proactively monitor that, because what a lot of organizations do is they have all good intention. We meet every Monday, we talk about it. But then that's usually one of the first meetings that gets moved or gets canceled because 5 weeks in a row, there's never a conversation and everything's smooth running. And then on Saturday, Scott forgot to shut it off and it spiked that no one was watching it. And so with the tools, you can set alerts. That helps you manage the budget, so you don't have a hit like, oh, gotcha, to beg for forgiveness, because I think they're getting a little bit more stingy as time goes on.
Scott, did you just do Select Star? Just saying it.
I'm against select start, but no, I do, as long as I have a limit. And you, I was gonna say too, in addition to the quota, the thought escaped me.
You can add them like spin down like a snowflake, you can. add
Oh, the
them-
auto shutdown, that's what I was gonna say. So
We
yes,
set all of our stuff in 1 minute shut down. If it's not being used after 1 minute, it'll automatically shut down.
not every service has it, but a number of them do, where you can have it, if it's cluster based, auto shut down clusters after 30 minutes or however
Yeah.
much in use, use those things.
And the other thing with BigQuery is that it is per use, right? So, every query you run gets billed, but there are ways that caching data within BigQuery where you pay a fixed cost for data and unlimited queries. So there are ways to kind of manage cost structures for very, very highly accessed tables.
And if you go in there, make sure you work with whoever your application provider is and have them give you a template of your costs. Because a lot of times they'll say it's pay as you use, and the little fine print they don't tell you is it's pay as you use, minimum of 1 hour bucket. Even though your query ran for 5 minutes, they're charging you for a full hour. So make sure that you spend the time to understand what that consumption model is. Because in some cases, they find out like, well, no one told me it was by the hour.
I thought most went to like the second hour.
They're starting to, but like some of the add-ons, like for like you was mentioned, Matillion is hourly buckets. They're getting to 15 minutes. If you go into the tools, ThoughtSpot is by query, but they do 10-minute increments. And so they're all crushing it down.
I think Snowflake definitely started the trend on that.
Oh, they did.
That's always
It was a
been,
millisecond.
it's always been the best thing about Snowflake, and it's so easy to monitor and so easy to really spend very little if you want to. I don't even know how they let us get away with how little we spend on it, but.
Did you have a question from the chat?
I have a comment, and personally, in the old days, I worked with something called Query Patrol on IBM Data Warehouse Cluster. And it let me do restrictions by users. So in the spirit of that, I'm excited to read that Jarrell says you can also set query limits with Snowflake per a user or group. If they go over it, it just shuts down and sends an email out to the admin.
That's the threshold, like Scott was telling, you could set them at different levels, caps, credits, people.
It's actually something I really like about Snowflake is their compute is a warehouse, which I guess would be comparable to, in theory, to that in Azure. Databricks computes or wherever. But you're able to have different audiences or different consumers of your data, each have kind of their own specific warehouse they go through, which makes it easier to then cap each one of those. Like this one should only have a small one and it shuts down right away. Data scientists maybe give more leeway, but you can kind of, for each audience, put the cap on it. And it really then helps you set a tighter cap because they have more regular patterns that you understand.
Nice. So we're often transitioning into the cloud. So is there anything you'd like to say about that transition piece and managing it? Is there cost things where we talked before, Scott, you said there isn't really a savings to lift and shift. If you do that, it's going to be more expensive in the cloud. So if you're transitioning and you're doing different pieces, is there a management or cost story to these platforms that you've seen that you could comment on as I put pieces up? Because I'm not going to be there in one jump.
Well, the cost is you're doubling up your cost.
Yeah.
One of, I think, the biggest mistakes that people make with their executives going into the cloud is they immediately say, ROI, $600,000, 600%, get it all done in a year. The reality of that is almost non-existent because your end users are going to keep demanding what they want. Your development team is going to be overburdened of trying to get it to the cloud. So until you're off of your old stuff, you're not taking full advantage of the cloud because I still have to have the servers and I still have my DBA. And how many people and how long does it take to decommission anything that's existing right now? I think all of us have probably had a database where we're like, okay, well, no one's using it, but we got to decommission it. And somebody somewhere said, yeah, wait, because there might be that one time. And so I think setting the expectation, and it's not a hidden cost, but it's a cost nobody talks about, that during that transition, until you're completely off, you're not gonna get that full ROI. And that second year is when I think everything starts going, because if you say, I'm bringing in a new data source and it's a manufacturing something, it's a line, boom. But I gotta tie that with my old data, which is over here on the on-prem database for all my product stuff. Okay, what's the fastest way to get that? Move all my product stuff to the cloud? Or just take that piece I brought up in the cloud and throw it back on-prem and build my reports? If you do the second, your journey just got a lot longer because, and who's driving that? The business impatience. I need my report. And the question always is, well, how fast can I get it? I'm like, well, if I put it on-prem, I'll get it to you in a week, but if I gotta bring all the other stuff, that'll take a couple of weeks. And get me it as fast as you can. So your executives, which goes back to your first point, have to be trained. That journey, to get all your ROI, you gotta get off the old stuff. But that requires them to be able to give the developers, the IT, the BI teams, you call it whatever you want. I'll stand behind you and say, Scott, you're just gonna have to wait that extra week because we're moving to the cloud. And even though we can get it done sooner over here, we are going here and it's gonna take us that extra week and I'm gonna support my BI team to do it. Otherwise, you're double dipping for that first year. You just flat on aren't.
Also, do your clients fail to consider or plan accordingly for if they've got on-prem data sources pushing to the cloud and that network communication cost?
I mean, I don't see that a lot. I mean, but that doesn't mean the others haven't experienced that a hell of a lot more than I have.
We operated in a hybrid world where we still landed our data on-prem, and then we shipped it out to the cloud. So yeah, we were paying some egress, whatever that is, to do that. But like we did it piecewise, right? So gradually moved pieces up. 3 years to shut down a data center. We still have to lift and shift in the cloud. So it's a long journey. Can't be, I should say.
Good.
And one, what do you attribute that to, right? You knew you wanted to get to the cloud, everybody was on board, we gotta get to the cloud,
Yeah.
and yet it took you 3 years.
Still taking,
Still taking that. What do you attribute to that?
two things. For us, it was two things. One, we did not lift and shift our core stuff. We rewrote things. So you're talking about data quality. One of the things we did is we rethought how we ingest data, and we put a very robust data quality pipeline that users interact with, custom built interfaces for our custom client account managers to work through data quality issues that we identify, master data management that allows corrections to be made and show up in the analytical layer. So we re-architected the whole system. Our platform is not ERPs and SaaS system, it's custom built software. So that was a large chunk of it. The other chunk of it was we built 2 new products. So that slows things down.
It's an opportune time to revisit something that's been out there a long time in many places, you know. The data analytics architecture's been out there for 20 years, you know. And if you're moving to the cloud, take a look at what you're doing and on all aspects.
But then that goes against the concept we just talked about, or does it, right? How clean does your data really have to be? We just said, you know, in nowadays, maybe you don't have to have perfectly clean data, yet you guys spent a bunch of time cleaning it up before you pushed it up to the cloud.
So the way our system works is that our data was clean for the purpose it was built for, our initial kind of products. But we built 2 products off the exhaust of that data, so the alternative uses of the data. For those alternative uses to work, we needed some other data to be cleaned up. So for those products to be realized, we had to make an investment to get it done.
But still goes back to this concept of where it makes sense, you know.
But I do think it is, you know, so maybe it's not that it's better data, but maybe you're just re-architecting the processes. So maybe today it's a nightly batch and that like barely is hanging on. And so, you know, you have to retool it. So this is the opportunity to say what services in the cloud, could I leverage that to do it faster, cheaper, or whatever? You know, it can scale wide for whatever, 5 minutes and then go back down and, so I think that might be where the opportunity is. Ideally, it's also to get better data, better decisions and all that, but it might just be from a technical delivery and implementation that you get that cost savings and performance and modernizing it.
I think there's a huge opportunity on data architecture, data ingestion, not moving the data as much, considering virtualization options, those opportunities.
You have to, again, encompass that with the impact to the business. So what I mean by that is if you're only talking to the CIO, he's gonna have a limited budget to spend. You're gonna give him all these wonderful things that you're gonna save if he gives you all this money to go do it. If you go to the president, he's like, look, I got that report, so I'm gonna give you $250,000 to get your tail to the web. That's great. How's that gonna change? And you're gonna go, oh, it's gonna be a really cool report and my team is gonna be a lot better off. You have to figure out a way, when I talk about burning platforms, to convince, and that's where I talked about educating these executives to say, the legacy we wanna leave is one well beyond just moving to the cloud, but we have to invest, just like we did 20 years ago, to your point, and built this thing. And it's 20 years been serving well, but now we're gonna have to switch horses and we have to invest. And so you as an end user, you may not notice it, but trust me, the wheels and the cog behind the green curtain, oh my God, it's gonna be a whole different world and they will be happy employees and they will be, productive employees and it's gonna be amazing.
And there's probably some scenarios or use cases you can bring up where you say, remember when that was supposed to take X amount of time to give you, but it ended up being 8 because something happened in our data integration, blah, blah, blah. There's probably some business case that's come along to where you can say, this is gonna be better, and this is why it's gonna be better.
And that's why you gotta remind them of their short-term memory, because executives say, well, but they will forget that, and so you have to remind them of those things, so they'll go, oh yeah, that's right, you said, oh, okay. Get that buy-in, and you can, if you get that support, you're gonna just go right through a hot neck like butter, hot like the butter.
Nice. All right. So as the final thing, I'd like to ask each panelist for a resource, your favorite website or book that relates to cloud or data that you recommend to this meetup audience to go check out. What is your favorite website you read on this concept, a book you thought was great recently, so that they have a resource they can go pick up if they want to do some more things themselves on this. Alan's got a thought.
Well, I mean, this is probably typical with everybody, but just the internet in general, Google in general is a fantastic resource to learn. So
Do you have a particular site that you used recently or book that you read that you really liked?
I'm in the process of reading a book on Data Vault. I don't know that it's necessarily my favorite book in the world because it is a very dense, challenging read.
Okay, what's the name of it?
It's the Data Vault Guru.
I just ordered that. Yeah.
It's, you will have to talk later.
So my drive here, I was listening to this podcast called The SQL Show, which is a very interesting podcast. They bring different guests on different topics on the modern data stack. SQL spelled SEQUEL show.
Nice.
So listen to that.
Thanks. Scott?
I was gonna look and see if I could find it. I'm a big fan of various podcasts as well, but the good and bad of social, I guess. I go to my Google Newsfeed and it now just knows all the different stories and technologies I like. And I know there's familiar sites, but some of them, that shame on me, I don't know exactly which one because that's not how I go there. It just comes to my feed. All the words it heard me say today, those will all just come up in my feed tomorrow. And
So your advice is sell out to the Google Mime, so whatever you want.
pick one though. I don't let everybody listen, but yeah, in this case, Google is the one I let listen. And so, yeah, it knows me and it tells me everything I need to know.
All right, Greg.
I'm reading a book called Consumption Economics, and it's all about cloud and, the consumption-based model and how it is revolutionizing the IT environment landscape. It's a few years old, So it's interesting to read like a few years ago what they were saying, and then you can translate it to, oh, shoot, that's actually happening today.
Okay.
So it's a good read in that manner.
What was the title again?
It's Consumption Economics. You can get it on
Consumption.
Amazon for 18 bucks.
All right.
We have one from online, from Jarrell, the big switch,
Big switch.
the big switch.
Thanks, Terrell. Is that a, does it say it's the book?
It's a book.
Jarrell, you wanna unmute and talk about it a bit?
Yeah, sure. So the big switch was written in 2010, and it doesn't really have much to do with the data and analytics concept in general, but it actually does talk about the movement to the cloud and why that will change the business and things to be thinking about. And he does a great job comparing it to actually how electricity changed the national landscape, and how it moved from being these gigantic, grids powered by generators, right, and individual generation sites, to a big network of grids that allows everyone to actually consume and get the electricity that they need. So he has a really great solid theory that the cloud does the same thing, right? And how, we're moving away from this concept of having our large data centers, and that a lot of things can be powered into the cloud and then budgeted in a certain way. So he wrote that in like 2009, 2010. It's a great book, and it's a great kind of theory around what cloud should be like for everybody.
Thanks, Terrell. What was that title again?
The Big Switch.
Big switch. Thanks.
I'd like to throw a couple other things out there. One is I use Google Alerts for keywords. So things that I want to monitor, like Scott, then I just get my list. I don't know where those are taking me, but I get my list of things I want to look at. The other thing is just a reminder, if you've come up with something good, share it with the group on our site.
There we go. Thank you guys so much for being on the panel this evening. That's the official end of that, but here, those who are enjoying being in the room can now mill around, say hi, and help finish the pizza, right, Dave? What do you want to say?
One quick house cleaning item. PTI is more than willing to host this, so we're willing to do that. If there's any of the companies that are willing to pitch in towards the food cost, we'd appreciate that. That's all.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. We'll